that one glorious word represents more than just the geography between the Sabine and the Rio Grande. It represents a unique idea and way of life. A life of rugged individualism, proud self-reliance, gritty toughness, and fierce independence. That is what made Texas, and that is what will save her again. Howdy, folks. Sam Houston here. I want to thank you for tuning into the Feed Bandit podcast. Feed Bandit is the Texas' first outdoors brand built by rabid Texans, for rabid Texans, and all those who aim to be one someday. We unapologetically promote the ideals that shape our Texas pride and Texas first patriotism through our love of hunting, the outdoors, and the gear and apparel we create. Texas, above all else, preserve the tradition, protect the legacy. Check us out at feedbandit.com. And to repeat that great rallying cry from a former colleague of mine, liberty or death. Now, enough of my talking. Here are a couple of bandits that love Texas as much as I do. Enjoy.
Howdy, friend. Welcome back to the Feed Bandit podcast. Jimmy here, back with you on another edition of our series, Leave the Swamp, where I go through the book TEXIT by Daniel Miller, see his compelling, so far, arguments for Texas becoming its own country again. So far, I can't find any reason not to support this. I mean, for a long time, I've always thought that should probably be, or is going to be, the end game at some point. And, in light of recent events, truly, I don't really think that has changed much at all. So I'm recording this mid-November 2024, and for posterity's sake, those who, for whatever reason, might be listening further down the line in the future, we just had a pretty big election in this these United States of America. And what ended up happening is, as you know, that the National Republican Party swept. I mean, it was a red wave that folks thought might have happened 4 years ago. Didn't happen. Certainly happened this time. The Republicans took the presidency, looks like both houses of the Congress, both chambers of the Congress, I should say, and by a pretty wide margin. So there seems to be maybe what they call a mandate there to govern. So on the national level, well, also on the state level, but of course, because everything's been so nationalized and centralized in this country, hence one of the big problems that TEXIT looks to rectify. Pretty much the only thing anyone knows about or hears about are national elections, primarily the election for president. And obviously Trump trounced Harris. That seemingly is a better thing than Harris and the evil party coming into power. My reservations center around a false sense of security, a false sense of what this could mean towards improving things for Texas in this country. Certainly, I should think that it is better than the evil blues coming in and further dragging us down into the abyss. However, if history is any guide, when the Reds come in, meaning the Republicans, they have a lot of good rhetoric, but not much actually happens. And in fact, they just continue, if not make worse, the trend that's currently going on. Now, where I have high hopes for this political change is in a few areas, is on the border. Trump's presidency will be an utter failure if he does not come in and stem or end the tide of the illegal immigration coming in. I think there's no question about that. Now, whether that's closing the border or changing policies internal to the country that act as a magnet for illegals and criminals to come in, whatever it is, or some combination, that should be the number one priority. Now, number two, closely followed on that, is ending support for unnecessary wars and genocides going around the world. What we absolutely don't need here, is to be drawn into our cause, probably more likely the federal government cause, World War III. That serves nobody's interests, especially not ours here in Texas. It would just be utter and complete destruction with no positive end in sight. So ideally, what he does is what he said he does, is just end what's going on, at least from the United States perspective, in Ukraine versus Russia, a little border dispute between two countries. Let them fight it out. None of our business. Just be done with it. The other one is all this crap going on in Israel, in the Middle East. Again, it shouldn't be any of our business. We should have nothing to do with it. Let them deal with it. What bothers me as a Texan is, and a citizen of a border state here, is the hundreds of billions of dollars of our money as a citizen of the United States being sent over to Israel and Ukraine, and nothing was done for 4 years on the border here to defend this country. Now, that's where the highest and best hope, I think, for the Trump presidency comes in, is reversing that. We'll see. I'm not very hopeful that he's going to end anything with the Middle East stuff. Enough already over there, right? The Israel, Gaza, West Bank, blah, blah, blah. He's too in bed with that situation, I think, to do much over there, which is unfortunate, because that, it'd be a terrible thing if World War III started there. Just get out of those people's hair, stop swinging baseball bats at hornets' nests over there, come home, take care of the people here. That's where the money is best well spent, is here. If you're going to spend it, then spend it on a border security that will completely end this immigration wave, illegal immigration wave coming over here, because it's destroying the culture here. And you're bringing all these people in that couldn't give a spit less about the culture of the United States, the culture of Texas, the laws that we have here, the respect for each person and private property. That's the number one thing that needs to happen. And then once you take care of your home, then you can kind of look outside that. This goes to all of us individually. It goes to you, me. We each need to take care of ourselves first. Make sure that everything is provided for in our family, number one, before we start looking outside of our own house for dragons to slay. We got to do that. But that same analogy works for a country. You got to take care of your country first before you're going out and trying to tell everybody else what to do, or trying to fix everybody else's problems. You just can't. That's a recipe for utter disaster and collapse, and that's what this country's kind of been on for a long time. It's been on a path towards oblivion, and it's killed us, watching our state being dragged down with it. Our great state of Texas could be one of, if not the most prosperous country in this world, were it be independent of Mordor in DC. Telling us what to do, how to live our lives. Enough of that already. At worst, let's have those battles in Austin and not worry about 49 other states in DC telling us what to do down here in Texas. So there's a little hope that came from this election, in my opinion. Uh, Decent rhetoric that we can hopefully gets followed through on. Uh, However, I would say that none of this should stop any efforts towards, again, taking care of our home here, doing the things that drive us towards making Texas able to operate independently. Should the time come that we say we're ready to get out, we should already have all of the infrastructure set up and ready to go. So, like I said, I'm pretty hopeful. Maybe we got a reprieve for another 4 years, or the can maybe is kicked down the road a little bit, another 4 years. So, I mean, truly at best, 4 years were bought to make further preparations and spread the word on the idea that we have what we need here in Texas. We can take care of ourselves, and that's what we should be doing going forward. A country of 350 million people is just not governable, at least not in a way where everyone will be happy. That's why there's so much division out there. That's why states are at each other's necks, at each other's throats, I should say. Yes, Texas at 30 million people is darn near too big to be governable. However, it's a lot easier, a lot better to do with that number of people than 11 times that or whatever. So, the main issues, I think, surrounding the argument being made in a book like TEXIT, they will not be solved by the election that just happened. Maybe certain things around the edges will be, but the whole idea of the overspending by the federal government, that will not change. I appreciate this idea of a government efficiency commission or whatever, but that's an oxymoron. Government will never be efficient, and there's no way enough spending could be cut unilaterally by the executive to make a dent. Because of entitlement programs, you can't cut enough of that stuff. We can't even cut that stuff. If you don't cut that stuff drastically, then the debt will continue to grow. The deficits will continue to grow. There's just no way around it. And unfortunately, Trump has already said he's not going to touch that stuff. So I like the rhetoric about all this stuff, but nothing's going to happen there. I hope I'm wrong, but it's just not. And the thing about it is, what's hilarious to me is, and this should kind of illustrate why skepticism is important even when so-called good things happen, like this red wave. Trump has tasked Elon Musk to lead this efficiency commission, where the guy himself is a corporate welfare queen, where all of his companies in order to exist, rely on government subsidies. So the question is he going to go in there, and when you're talking about eliminating waste, is he going to eliminate all the subsidies that his companies get? Is he going to work against his own interest? I don't know. That'll be interesting to see. But these are the things that you got to kind of take a step back and, don't get too distracted by all the hope and everything like that. Be realistic and say, okay, is this enough for me to stop pushing for an independent Texas, pushing for, or telling everyone I know and getting the word out there to think about Texas, Texas above all else. And when we say Texas above all else, we're not saying literally all else. We're saying all else politically, government-wise, certainly. Because remember what I just said. Number one is taking care of yourself and your family. Take care of your home first. Then maybe take care of your extended family, your community first, your immediate community, and then work your way out in circles, right? So it's going to be, if you actually do that, it would be a while before you even got to the national level. I mean, the state level, much less the national level. But if everyone did that, all of this negativity towards each other across states, across parties, this, that, and the other, that really wouldn't exist because everyone would be taking care of their own stuff, so there wouldn't be that wedge to divide us. So to sum all this up, I'm hopeful that it is morning again in America. However, I'm realistic that seeing how things are going and the way, say, just look at the national debt, how fast it's growing. It's kind of like a train rolling downhill without brakes. There's no way it's going to be stopped really at this point. There is no stomach in politicians that go to Washington to cut any spending. It's just not going to happen to make any difference, I should say. They'll talk about that. Maybe they'll cut things here and there and it'll sound really big in the billions and stuff. But look at the grand scheme of thing. When you're talking trillions of dollars in debt and trillions of dollars of spending, it ain't going to be anything. So we just got to be skeptical. Keep your skepticism. It's very important. Keep focused on Texas, because just know this is where we live. This is our homeland. This is the greatest state, the greatest place in the entire world, and we have to fight to keep it that way. We have to fight to preserve our traditions here, and we have to fight to protect the legacy of Texas. So that's the biggest, I think, lesson to come out of this election. Be hopeful. However, be skeptical, and keep your head on a swivel, because it's going to get wild in the next 4 years, I think. So let's keep Texas first and foremost in our minds, and keep remembering Texas above all else politically, so that we can do our best, or do our absolute best, especially for our posterity, especially for our kids. What makes me passionate about all this is the fact that I have kids now. I want them to end up growing up in the greatest place in the world, and that I want that to be Texas. So let's do what we can to preserve the tradition so that we can protect the legacy. All right. Now let's jump back into the book TEXIT by Daniel Miller. We've gone through chapter 2, so here we are starting with chapter 3, which is entitled Causes Which Impel Them. Starting out with a quote here. When the federal Republican Constitution of their country, which they have sworn to support, no longer has a substantial existence, and the whole nature of their government has been forcibly changed without their consent, from a restricted federative republic composed of sovereign states to a consolidated central military despotism. So that's a clause out of the Texas Declaration of Independence, March 2nd, 1836. March 2nd, which actually also happens to be my daughter's birthday. I have been asked by the media many times to explain why support for TEXIT has grown into a major political issue. I have often thought about how ludicrous it is for them to ask that question and expect a 1 or 2 sentence answer. Honestly, it would take multiple books to detail all the grievances Texans have with the federal system, and to point out all the ways that it has and continues to fail. By the time it was written, it would be out of date and in need of expansion. However, it can be boiled down to its essence. Quote, the people of Texas are tired of living under 180,000 pages of federal laws administered by 440 separate federal agencies and 2.2 million unelected bureaucrats. The people of Texas are sick of having their lives dictated by politicians they didn't elect, forcing policies on them they don't want. At a very basic level, hearkening back to their history, Texans don't like to be told what to do, when to do it, or how to do it. They want to govern themselves. They also acknowledge that there is a very limited role for government. However, Texans bristle at both the perception and reality of what governance has become. Perception is as strong, if not stronger, than reality, and the reality is worse than most perceive. Author and Texas-based entrepreneur David Thomas Roberts expressed the sentiments of the vast majority of Texans when he wrote, quote, "Our income and our labors are taxed and redistributed to those who won't work, to inefficient and corrupt governmental agencies, to programs that might violate our faith, and to morally despicable foreign governments, of which many hate us despite the money we give them." So in a constant or current context, think of what he said there, distributed to those who won't work, inefficient agencies, and morally despicable foreign governments. I mean, think about all the magnets, the welfare magnets we have drawing in all these illegal invaders. Think of all the corrupt government agencies that ruin your life, starting with the IRS, not to mention the Federal Reserve, which creates all the inflation that we're seeing right now. And then these morally despicable foreign governments sending money to Ukraine, the most corrupt country on the planet, Israel, who, by any measure, and I don't know why this is controversial, is actually committing genocide in Gaza. Yet we're sending all this stuff to all these countries and all these people, but doing nothing here at home, as I've been saying, nothing here at home to take care of our people and to defend our borders. It just, obviously you can tell it boils my blood. Anyway, I'm going to continue. Quote, "This marriage has run its course," agrees author Paul Vandevelde in a 2012 op-ed for the Los Angeles Times. "Too many niggling little things built up over time, driving us all crazy. So let's just stop. It's time to divvy up the China and draft the property settlement." The systemic problems with the union stand in stark contrast to the success story of Texas. Sure, Texas has its issues, but increasingly our issues are being seen as a function of our membership in the union and our success and prosperity in spite of it. This causes Texans to look at the federal government with deep-seated distrust and ever-growing contempt. This attitude was perfectly captured by Chuck Poole, a columnist with the Arlington Voice. This nation, as some would call it, is not only a highly functional world-class economy engaging in robust commerce with other nations and neighboring states, it actually has a budget, a balanced one at that, he wrote. Why should the great Republic of Texas continue to be at the losing end of the welfare wormhole that wends its way to New York and other so-called blue states by way of the Washington vortex? Hear, hear. The perception is that the federal government is inefficient, ineffective, incompetent, and incapable of understanding the needs and desires of the people under its umbrella. The reality is far worse. With all of its faults, the federal government continues to assume more control over every facet of daily life and assert more authority over the lives of hardworking individuals. In its desire to control everything and everyone, it extracts more taxes to fund its efforts, rendering even the most productive, hardworking amongst us as mere vassals in a massive feudal state. All of this is to buy the loyalty of the thumbsuckers, whiners, and social experimenters who refuse to produce, refuse to compete, and reject any notion of personal accountability. That goes to what I was saying. Take care of yourself and your home first. Crushed under the weight of the bureaucracy necessary to administer their superstate, individual initiative is stifled, dissension is suppressed, and any hope of internal reform that strips power from the federal machine withers and dies. To ensure total control, the federal government has converted the checks and balances of the three-branch government into agencies of manufactured dissent to give the semblance of choice, but, in practice, acts as a rubber stamp for policies that centralize more control in the halls of Washington, D.C. In the name of national security and in violation of its own laws and constitutionally guaranteed protections against illegal search and seizure, the federal government has admittedly intercepted every electronic communication made by every citizen. Yet the borders are still porous, allowing virtually unrestricted migration, leaving citizens as the ones required to bear the full weight of the national security state. Christian principles, once the bedrock of our society, are denigrated as anachronistic, except for love thy neighbor, but only when it applies to someone who is part of the latest pet cause as dictated by the Hollywood elites. But it's never if your neighbor is an unborn child, a member of the opposite political party, or a follower of a person who uttered those words in the first place. Those who, following the examples of the founders of the American Union, invoke God in the public sphere as mercilessly mocked, unless their God is Allah, Satan, a head of cabbage, or themselves. This system has relegated state elected officials, the first line of defense against federal overreach in a federated republic, to the role of caretakers and administrators of federal policy. It has bribed them into compliance with the hope that one day they too may feed at the federal money trough in Washington as a congressman, senator, or even president. Given the nearly unrestricted power of lawmaking and taxation, they ensure that actual dissent is nearly non-existent. Every citizen has become a federal lawbreaker, and we are suffocated under a tax code that few have actually read and no one fully understands. Like the sword of Damocles, federal retribution hangs over the heads of everyone, waiting to impale anyone who steps out of line. This is the true thought crime of TEXIT supporters. It is perfectly fashionable in conservative circles to question the actions of federal government when the Democrats are in charge. It's even more fashionable for liberals to resist when Republicans hold the reins. Bookstores are filled with anti-government screeds from every mid-level politician looking for a promotion. The airwaves are filled with pundits who slam the DC machine for every action or inaction. However, questioning whether Texas should be part of this machine is somehow a bridge too far. The bridge is getting closer. By heaping piles of injustice, indignity, and indecision on Texans, the federal government and the people of the United States themselves are making the case for TEXIT daily. Ian Baldwin and Frank Bryan, writing for the Washington Post, summed it up, quote, "The winds of secession are blowing. Over the past 50 years, the U.S. government has grown too big, too corrupt, and too aggressive toward the world, toward its own citizens, and toward local democratic institutions. It has abandoned the democratic vision of its founders and eroded Americans' fundamental dreams." Let me go back to something he wrote here real quick and keep this in mind as we go through the next 4 years. It's perfect quote. "It's perfectly fashionable in conservative circles to question the actions of federal government when the Democrats are in charge, which is what has happened the last 4 years. It's even more fashionable for liberals to resist when Republicans hold the reins, which is what we're already hearing from, say, Democratic governors saying that they're not going to obey the federal government with Trump in charge. So that's going to be very interesting to watch over the next 4 years. Truly, who may become the biggest supporters of, at the very least, nullification of federal government laws and regulations and dictates, but maybe even have more talk of actual secession, might be the blue states, might be states like California that say it's too red here. We have to get out because we can't do our insane leftist policies if we stay in. And you know what? California leaving might be just as big of a deal, maybe just as good of a thing as if Texas left for Texans. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be very interesting. The federal superstate. In the midst of the fight over the Affordable Care Act, known colloquially as Obamacare, tongue twister for me, Judge Andrew Napolitano, by the way, which is a great podcast, Judging Freedom. You got to listen to it. I listen to it religiously. Very interesting. Judge Andrew Napolitano interviewed South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn, the number 3 ranking Democrat in Congress, on the Fox News channel. Napolitano posed a question to the congressman. Where in the Constitution is the federal government authorized to manage health care? His response, quote, "Most of what we do down here isn't authorized by the Constitution." Congressman, don't you remember that you took an oath to uphold the Constitution? Napolitano asked. Yes, but if you tell me where in the Constitution it is prohibited for the federal government to manage health care. Sadly enough, exchanges such as this are far too common. Oh, he's saying, yes, but you tell me where in the Constitution it's prohibited for the federal government to manage health care. Well, that's not how the Constitution works. The states only gave the federal government certain powers, and everything else was left to the states. And one of those powers was not health care. So this guy is obviously ignorant. Old Jim Clyburn, South Carolina. Ignoramus. I'll continue. Sadly enough, exchanges such as this are far too common. When push comes to shove, even the staunchest conservatives in the federal government fall back on their belief in a virtually unlimited power center in Washington. When power is concentrated and expanded in this manner, it requires a massive bureaucracy to oversee its operations. To classify the federal bureaucracy as massive is, in itself, a massive understatement. As with many things related to the federal government, current and accurate numbers are hard to come by. Officially, the federal government employs approximately 2.6 million workers, in addition to a number of government contractors. This number is actually a fraction of the actual size of bureaucracy. An internal government report in 2005 noted all segments of the federal government actually employed approximately 14.6 million people. Good God. Excuse me. That included 1.9 million civil servants, 770,000 postal workers, Jesus, 1.44 million uniformed service personnel, 7.6 million contractors, and 2.9 million grantees. This equates to a ratio of more than 5 shadow government employees for every reported civil servant on the federal payroll. To put this into perspective, if the federal government was its own standalone country, it would be ranked 75th in the world by population. If it was a state in the Union, it would be ranked 5th among other states. The federal bureaucracy has been growing for decades and shows no sign of stopping. From the 1960s to the 1990s, the number of senior executives and political appointees in the federal bureaucracy quintupled, increasing the average number of layers between the president and street-level bureaucrats from 17 in 1960 to 32 in 1992. Currently, there's an average of 1 federal employee or contractor for every 4 people in the United States. So pathetic. As the number of bureaucrats has increased, so have their bank accounts. Federal compensation averaged $119,934 in 2014, which is 78% higher than the private sector average of $67,246. Okay, that right there should be enough to get everyone on board with leaving the swamp. You know, as I said, you can't drain the swamp. This is showing you why. It's too far entrenched, too large, the bureaucracy just can't be uprooted. So you got to leave. You just got to say enough, no more. We're not supporting it. We got to get out. Because how can you justify paying 78% more to a bureaucrat that produces nothing from the private sector, from an average private sector wage? That is absolutely ridiculous. Continuing. When bureaucracy grows this large, this fast, accountability is one of the first casualties. That includes accountability and accurately knowing or reporting its own size and scope. Accountability is next to non-existent in determining the actual size and scope of the federal bureaucracy. Notably, with respect to the number of agencies, the Administrative Conference of the United States, which lists 115 agencies in the appendix of its most recent sourcebook of United States executive agencies, had the following to say. There is no authoritative list of government agencies. For example, FOIA.gov, FOIA.gov, maintained by the Department of Justice, lists 78 independent executive agencies and 174 components of the executive departments as units that comply with the Federal Freedom of Information Act requirements imposed on every federal agency. This appears to be on the conservative end of the range of possible agency definitions. The United States Government Manual lists 96 independent executive units and 220 components of the executive departments. An even more inclusive listing comes from USA.gov, which lists 137 independent executive agencies and 268 units in the cabinet. To justify its existence, the federal bureaucracy constantly creates new programs within its agencies. And I would say, and he's probably might get to this, I would argue, creates more problems that then it justifies its own existence by saying it has to fix these problems that it's already solved. It's a self-licking ice cream cone. This is where federal inefficiency is at its pinnacle. As of 2016, there were 1,158 federal programs that duplicate other programs with substantially the same aims, covering a wide range of aims. That included 342 separate economic development programs, 130 programs serving at-risk youth, 90 early childhood development programs, 75 programs funding international education, cultural, and training exchange activities, 72 federal programs dedicated to safe water, 50 homeless assistance programs, 45 federal agencies conducting federal criminal investigations, 40 separate employment and training programs, 28 rural development programs, 27 teen pregnancy programs, 23 agencies providing aid to countries of the former Soviet Union, 19 programs fighting substance abuse, 17 rural water and wastewater programs spread across 8 separate agencies, 17 agencies monitoring 400 international trade agreements, 12 food safety agencies, 11 principal statistics agencies, and 4 overlapping land management agencies. The federal mentality seems to be that if one program doesn't solve the problem, another program that does substantially the same thing should be created in addition to the one that wasn't cutting the mustard. Brian M. Rydell, a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, was clear on how this inefficiency is used to exponentially grow federal rules and regulations. Quote, "This means not only additional bureaucracies to run these overlapping programs, but also an administrative nightmare for program beneficiaries who must navigate each program's distinct rules and requirements." Unquote. Oh boy. Since 1976, 195,189 agency rules have been issued and recorded in the Federal Register. The Code of Federal Regulations, the codified general and permanent rules and regulations of the federal government, is massive. In 1960, the CFR contained 22,877 pages. Since 1975, its total page count has grown from 71,000 to 185,000 at the end of 2016. To put it in perspective, if every page of the CFR were laid end to end, just the portion of the federal rules that govern your life would stretch more than 32 miles. Federal regulatory code currently contains more than 1 million individual regulatory restrictions. The volume of regulations is so massive that if reading them was your full-time job, it would take you more than 3 years to read them all. Of course, more regulations means more forms. Bureaucrats like paperwork. The federal government loves it. According to a research from the American Action Forum, just a sample of 68 of 440 federal agencies imposes roughly 23,000 forms. These forms alone help generate more than 11.4 billion hours of paperwork annually, averaging out to 35 hours for every man, woman, and child in the United States. Talk about an utter, massive waste of life. Look, we all have a finite amount of time on this planet before we're dead and gone. Every second that ticks by, you can't get that back. It's water under the bridge. It's gone. So the very fact that the federal government makes each of us spend 35 hours to fill out these stupid and pointless pieces of paper for this bloated and unnecessary, unconstitutional, and immoral federal government. They're stealing even that much of our life just by filling out damn forms that you can never get back. You'll never get 35 hours back. They've stolen that from us all. Continuing. Even if the federal government cannot accurately account for its true size or who works for it, it's reasonable to expect that, at a minimum, they would know the law of the land. They don't. In an example of a failed attempt to tally up the number of laws on a specific subject area, in 1982, the Justice Department launched an effort to officially identify the total number of criminal laws. It was a dismal failure. The project ended after 2 years without reaching a conclusion. After 2 years of exhaustive research, the department was able to compile a list of approximately 3,000 criminal offenses before having to throw in the towel. The effort and its futile outcome was highlighted in a Wall Street Journal article, which reported that this effort came as part of a long and ultimately failed campaign to persuade Congress to revise the criminal code, which, by the 1980s, was scattered among 50 titles and 23,000 pages of federal law. The effort, headed by Ronald Gaynor, a Justice Department official, is considered the most exhaustive attempt to count the number of federal criminal laws in history. After officially throwing in the towel, Gaynor expressed his frustration. "You will have died and been resurrected 3 times and still not have an answer to this question." There is a significant problem with the federal government's inability to construct a comprehensive and definitive list of criminal acts under the federal system. Everyone is potentially a criminal. However, the reality is much worse than the potentiality. There is no one in the United States over the age of 18 who cannot be indicted for some federal crime. Retired Louisiana State University law professor John Baker told the Wall Street Journal in July 2011. That is not an exaggeration. Let that sink in. There is no one in the United States over 18 who cannot be indicted for some federal crime. If that's not tyranny, I don't know what is. A 2015 article in the National Review reinforced this claim. There are so many regulations and criminal statutes on the books that a civil liberties expert and lawyer, Harvey Silverglate, thinks that the average American commits 3 felonies a day, and they often are not even aware they're breaking the law. That is, not until a federal agency begins an investigation and they are indicted. The impact of this federal superstate is being felt by Texans who find it impossible to navigate a federal rule book under which we are required to live, but which no one can see in total. All the while, we're being crushed under the weight of a bureaucracy that continues to grow at breakneck pace, but whose true size and scope are a mystery. This faceless, amorphous, uncaring bureaucracy touches and micromanages every facet of our daily lives and compels our obedience to laws they themselves do not know and cannot count, all under the threat of criminal prosecution. So I'm going to pause right there in chapter 3. That's about halfway through. That is a lot to take in, no doubt. But that last piece right there, talking about how it's grown so large that no one, not even the government itself, knows what laws or what's illegal, what's not. No one knows the whole extent of it. Let me just take you all back in time real fast to 1776 and 1836. A big part of what caused the folks living back then to wage a war that was forced upon them by Great Britain in 76 and Mexico in 1836 was because they thought that the governmental power in London and in Mexico City has become too overbearing and ceased respecting any arrangements or constitution or laws that were in place to help protect them, to help guarantee their freedoms. How can anyone listening to what I just read not walk away from that thinking, my God, what's going on now with the U.S. federal government? How anyone could walk away and not think that's 10, 100 times worse than what was happening then? Because think of all the technology that the tyrants in Washington can use now to stay on top of everybody else, to monitor. You know, they look at every email, they record every call we have, everything. Santa Anna in 36 did not have anything near that capability to do. And those guys, those brave souls, fought an overwhelming Mexican army to gain their independence. And Mexico wasn't anywhere near as oppressive as Mordor, DC is. Let that sink in. What have we allowed to happen to this state? I would argue it's pathetic, and we need to grow some cojones and spread the word, spread it far and wide. Everyone you know that it's time to leave the swamp. You know, yes, maybe some time has been bought with this most recent election, but hear me, not much is going to change. Not the main core things. The only main core thing that could change are the things I talked about: the border, the immigration issue, and hopefully not getting us into World War III. Other than that, that federal government that I just read about will not shrink. I hope I'm wrong, but I just don't see it happening. It'll just continue to grow. We'll continue to go into debt. Our currency, the dollar, will continue to be destroyed through inflation. Inflation caused by massive government debt that has to be monetized by the central bank, the Federal Reserve, by printing money. That's what creates inflation. That's what's driving prices higher. It's a function of creating money, printing money, the federal government printing money, or Federal Reserve printing money due to massive deficit spending by the federal government. Like I say, you got to think locally, take care of your own business, and let's think in terms of Texas above all else. If we don't, then we'll be dragged down into the abyss with this tyrannical Leviathan in Mordor, DC. So, man, oh man, the positive here is that we have the solution in front of us. That's what we've been talking about here. Let's just leave the swamp. We do that. Can you imagine what the unburden that we will have, the burden that will go away, the albatross that will be removed from our neck? That's the word that you got to spread around to everybody else. Help us out here. Help out the Feed Bandits, spreading that word, spreading that love of Texas, and that's how we'll get it done. So I hope you enjoyed this one. The next installment of the Leave the Swamp series, I'll be finishing out chapter 3, and we'll keep moving along. But remember, spread the word and support your local feed store. Y'all take care. Thank you.
Well, I hope the Bandits gave you an interesting episode that either entertained or educated you. Or better yet, both. Hell, I told them this podcasting thing looks harder to do than defeating Santa Anna. So if you would, please help them out by sharing it with all your like-minded friends to help the Bandits get the word out. And don't forget to check us out at feedbandit.com and grab some gear and apparel to support the cause of Texas. Remember, Texas, above all else, preserve the tradition, protect the legacy. Finally, as I said some time ago on the eve of the great battle, and I vigorously repeat here again, be men, be free men, that your children may bless their father's name. Well, fellow bandit, until next time.